Dr. David Clark.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can't avoid now using Southland as an example of how this budget has failed. It's something I want to come back to. That speech there shows just how out of touch this government has become. The member for Invercargill tried to paint economic development in Southland in a good light when it has dropped by a whole 10%. A whole 10% in 2015. I hope it's simply a coincidence that has happened in the time that she's been elected the member there. I don't think it's entirely her fault that it's dropped 10%, but you do begin to wonder when you hear a speech like that that is so disconnected from the reality of people living in that city. When they're living in a house with a health system where funding has been cut by $1.7 billion and people in Southland are missing out on operations, when roading funding in Southland has been cut by 23%. Nationals cut transport funding for Southland by 23%, $14 million, and that's just since 2010. That is how disconnected that member is. And it is a real shame to see someone so out of touch when her constituents are crying out for support. The average household income in Southland fell by $49 a week last year. In Southland, $49 a week. The average household income fell in Southland last year. It is extraordinary. I spent a bit of time visiting Invercargill. I wonder if the member herself's ever been there, because with that kind of reality, it's an alternative reality. It's not how things are going in that city right now. There are lots of great people in Invercargill. I've met loads of great people, great ideas. The Transport Museum going ahead. There are people who are working hard on their farms, trying to make a crust, risking their shirt every day. And then you've got a member there who's trying to pretend everything's rosy when 10% is knocked off the economy there in just 1 year. And unemployment, she says, is very low. Well, it's doubled. It's doubled since 2008 in that part of the world under this government's watch. It is extraordinary. And Nationals also cut, let's not forget, $109 million just from the Southern DHB budget in real terms under this government's watch. This is a real example of regional neglect. And I am glad the member has brought up Southland, because it's like a poster for regional neglect under this government. Burglaries in the Southland police area. My colleague Stuart Nash has been looking into the staff cuts in policing and the effect that that's having. Burglaries in Southland area rose by 11% in the past year. 11% burglaries. And also we've got assaults up by 41%. Up by 41% in the Southland area. And that member over there says everything's perky. And that shows just how out of touch and arrogant that government is becoming. They can look at that situation and say everything's fine. All of you people in Southland who are doing it tough, nothing to see here. You're imagining it. You're just imagining it. The burglaries have gone up, the assaults have gone up, the funding for the hospital's gone down, roading's cut by 23%, and you're just imagining it. The economy's down 10%, you're just imagining it. The government's doing a great job, if you'd believe that member. Well, this government is too focused on those at the top. That is the reality. They have become more and more focused on the super rich. I'm not talking about middle New Zealand. Those people are working hard every day. They're not interested in them anymore. They're only interested in the super rich. And we've seen it, of course, with the tax haven investigation they didn't need to have and then have been embarrassed into making. We've seen it in numerous areas where they've crept up the health funding a little bit this year, just nearly keeping pace with inflation, because they're so embarrassed with that $1.7 billion they've cut out of the health budget. But middle New Zealand knows the reality is different to the way they're painting it. Working families under the last Labor government, and I wasn't there, so I can't claim credit for this, they got 50% of the value of growth in the economy, and it grew, of course, a lot faster under the last Labor government. Under this government, it's grown by just 37%, that portion of the economy. Working people got just 37% of the benefit of the minimal growth that there has been. So a smaller and smaller and smaller portion of the value of economic gains is going to working people. Most of the money, unfortunately, is going to very few at the very, very top. That's whose interests they're looking out for. And so, under this government, what we're seeing is the Kiwi dream slipping away. The aspiration to own your own home. I speak with students in my own electorate who say they cannot now imagine owning their own home. When I was a student, I think pretty much every student thought if they wanted to one day, and if they worked hard, they could own their own home. Well, there's now a generation of students who cannot imagine that. They're burdened with student debt, and home ownership rates have plummeted. They used to be over 50% for 25 to 40-year-olds. Now they're down at just 25%. That's this government's watch, and it's growing. The inequalities are growing. Those at the very top are getting wealthier, but actually 99% of New Zealanders are doing it tougher than ever under this government. They're working hard, they're trying to get ahead, they're doing the right things, but this government keeps putting roadblocks in the way. It's not supporting rural aspiration, it is neglecting the regions, and that's what we looked at, of course, with these estimates. The regional neglect was evident there in the tiny pot of money set aside for regional development. Nothing that will change the dial. A little bit of window dressing here and there. That is Stephen Joyce's style. He wants people to think he's doing something. There's a little bit of busy work there, but there's nothing to change the dial in the regions. And of course, these members, when they do go and visit their regions, if they do get out beyond Wellington, will see that people in the regions are crying out for support. The understanding of regional neglect is very real when you go to a town like Gisborne. There are people there who want to get ahead, who are working hard, who have aspirations, but the government just is not coming to the party. The government is not coming to the party. They are absent. My colleague is absolutely right. And she is there on the ground working with those people. And it will be a good day when she is a minister in the government making the change that matters for those people. And it looks like it's coming closer because these people are getting so out of touch on the other side of the House. Well, Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House would do things differently. We would invest in people. We have said that we want to have 3 years of post-secondary education free. We won't be getting there in our first term. We've laid out a plan. Some people say, look, you want to do it faster, but we've set out a plan that is affordable, where New Zealanders can get 3 years of free post-secondary education so that we can retrain as we need to as New Zealanders, so that people in the regions can access education, so that education provides opportunity for everybody, not just the super wealthy, Mr. Speaker. And that is part of the Kiwi dream. We've said that we will, over time, get that money back, the $1.7 billion that they've stripped out of the health system. We'll make sure that people do get the operations that they need. We'll make sure we have better public health care, and we will make sure that the economy is there to support those changes and aspirations that we have. Because we know, Mr. Speaker, that more equal economies tend to do better. We support people to have the basics, where you make sure that every person has a decent education, where kids go to school with food in their tummies, where they have access to quality education, where the infrastructure is there to support opportunities in the regions, countries get ahead. And under this government, we've watched unemployment's going to be up by their own projections by 45,000 at the next election since they took office, Mr. Speaker. They set themselves a target of growing exports. They said exports will grow to 40% of our gross domestic product. Well, where are they now, Mr. Speaker? They're actually back behind the starting line. They were around 30 when they started. They're now at less than 30 and going backwards. That's a sign of government that is failing to meet its own goals, Mr. Speaker. And so what we'd like to see, of course, is our regions to succeed, because New Zealand cannot afford a two-speed economy. We cannot afford to see 1 or 2 cities in New Zealand getting ahead, and they've got their own problems, whilst the regions are left alone to suffer in silence. That will not get our country ahead. We need every part of New Zealand to be succeeding if our country is to get ahead. And we want to make sure that wage and salary earners get their share of the gains that we are getting in our economy. And they are very small, and we want to grow them, but we want to make sure they get their fair share too. In 2015, the fact that that share of the economy was going more and more to the very, very wealthiest meant that the average family in New Zealand got $50 a week less in the pocket in real terms, Mr. Speaker, in 2015. That is huge. That is absolutely huge. And families are noticing it because they are not having the kind of incomes, dispensable income that they used to have, Mr. Speaker. We have an aspiration for New Zealand. We're calling it the Kiwi Dream. It's about making sure New Zealanders have the opportunities they need to get ahead. It's making sure healthcare is properly funded. It's making sure the regions are supported in their aspirations. It's about making sure all New Zealanders get a fair suck of the salve. Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker.
I call Jamie Lee Ross.